believe in the ripple effect.
What's up? Finally, I'm back. Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. And I'm your host, Ricardo Brendas, also known as Rick Brandes, and a great returning guest, somebody I haven't talked to in quite a while, but one of my favorite past guests, Dr. Dominic D'Agostino. After hearing this episode, if you want to hear past episodes, check out episode 132, which is an old one, and then he was on again in 2022 on episode 386. And something I take pride in doing is constantly trying to find interesting guests, people that are lesser known in the podcast community, maybe somebody who hasn't done a whole bunch of interviews yet, and then share them with my audience. And Dr. Dominic D'Agostino is one of those guests that I'm very proud to say was on my podcast prior to being on much larger shows like the Joe Rogan Experience. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I was so excited about all the fascinating information that we shared on the podcast and really thought Dr. Dominic D'Agostino is a great advocate for the keto diet and really helping people rethink the way they're eating and all the benefits of doing that. So, of course, at the time, being a big Joe Rogan Experience listener and fan and knowing he was having people on like Mark Sisson and others who were advocates for high-fat, low-carb, low-sugar diets. So I suggested to Dom D'Agostino to reach out to Joe Rogan and try to get on. And at that time, he told me he was already in conversations with the JRE camp, and he's scheduling an appearance on JRE very shortly. And then I think less than a month later, in August, he appears on Joe Rogan for the first time, and it's one of many appearances on JRE. And I truly believe that was a historic episode that really exposed the ketogenic diet to so many people all around the world and informed them about what it is and how it can help. But more importantly, it really highlighted the dangers of eating the modern American diet and the dangers of having a high-carb diet where you're ignoring sugar consumption and processed foods. So obviously, if you're not familiar with Dr. Dominic D'Agostino, you probably by now you have a rough idea of what we're going to talk about. Health, nutrition, specifically the ketogenic diet and high-fat, low-carb, low-sugar diets and how it can help your health. But we also discuss many other related topics. So get ready for a very informative and fun discussion with Dr. Dominic D'Agostino. And like most of the shows he appears on, for some people who are new to this information, it might feel like information overload. So if you have to listen to it more than once or check out other interviews, please do. Also check out his amazing TED Talk that he's done, which you can find on YouTube. Just search Dr. Dominic D'Agostino and TED Talk and you'll find it. I also want to apologize for the hiatus since my last episode. From time to time, life gets too crazy to book shows, record shows, edit shows, upload shows, and all that other stuff that comes with running a podcast. But I want to thank everyone who always sticks with me. And when I do upload a new episode, you guys are the first to download and the first to view the show. And I can't thank you guys enough. I also can't thank all the people who continue to support the show, even during these breaks. The people who buy merch at the rippleeffectpodcast.com or the rippleeffectpodcastmerch.com. The people who continue to support me on Patreon. The people who send donations. The people who send crypto. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I truly, truly appreciate it. With my wife and I having a crazy work schedule, with the kids having a crazy sports schedule, with me coaching, and all the other things that make our schedule kind of crazy. And I'm sure many of you guys listening have similar, very crazy schedules. You know it's hard to find time to record a podcast and do all the other work that comes with it. So as always, I truly appreciate your understanding of the breaks and the hiatus from time to time. As the winter comes, I will put out more episodes and I'll have a little bit more free time. But The good news is that this is a new episode. I have a bunch of guests already booked, and I'm really excited about putting out shows on a regular basis again. And I do have to remind you guys, if you do enjoy this show and if you want shows on a regular basis, remember this is a value for value show. There's plenty of ways to support the show. You can buy merch. You can send a one-time donation via Venmo or PayPal. You can support us monthly on Patreon. You can send crypto, or you can check out our sponsors. And that's all great ways of supporting the show, and more importantly, showing your appreciation for the show. But of course, if you can't financially support the show, like I always tell you guys, write a review, tell people about the show, share the show on all the platforms you're on. I recently got onto TikTok, which apparently is a very censor-friendly platform. They've censored quite a few clips that I've uploaded, and they're actually clips that I've uploaded on my YouTube Clips channel, and I've had no issues with. But for some reason, those same clips are having issues on TikTok. And I think there's something else going on, because I had a couple videos, clips that I uploaded recently that were going viral. They seemed to be getting views real quickly. Every couple minutes, I was getting a couple hundred views, and all of a sudden the view stopped out of nowhere. So I don't know what happened, but I went from getting hundreds of views quickly to not getting any views for days. But anyways, if you want to follow me on TikTok, please do. I do have a YouTube Clips channel, but you can't find the full episodes on there, but it is available on many other video platforms if you're looking for the video version. You can find all of these links and more on the rippleeffectpodcast.com. My YouTube channel also has a documentary playlist that I started. I did that way back in the day before I got kicked off YouTube. I had a huge documentary playlist. Anything cool or any past documentaries I really enjoyed that I could find on YouTube, I would put it in this playlist just in case you're ever bored and looking for something to watch. But when I got removed off YouTube, so did that playlist. But now I started a new one, so check that out. And that's it. I think this intro is long enough. You haven't heard my voice in a while, so I figure you didn't mind a couple updates and a bit longer intro than usual. But finally, we can get into the discussion with Dr. Dominic D'Agostino. As always, all his links and all his stuff will be in the show description. And I will talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.
Yeah, great to be on again, Ricky. Yeah, it's been some time. Some time has passed. A lot has happened in the world of, I guess, ketogenic diets, ketone supplementation, metabolic therapies. Our conference that we host called the Metabolic Summit, which is, had about 800 people a few months ago here in Clearwater. So it's a growing field. And I guess a little bit of background for the listeners, I majored in nutrition and then in biology as an undergrad, and then physiology and neuroscience for my PhD, and then pursued a postdoctoral fellowship by the U.S. Navy, Office of Navy Research. And that led me to develop and test mitigation strategies for oxygen toxicity seizures. The big focus was understanding why these seizures occur and how to prevent them. And in the process of looking at different pharmacological therapies, I discovered that the ketogenic diet works when drugs fail for epilepsy and pretty much all of the other types of seizures. So that was interesting to me. And I was like, oh, I can bring my nutrition interest back into my university research. So I was kind of excited about that. Although the military really didn't want a ketogenic diet mitigation strategy, there was it was high fat. There was concerns about implementation. Oh, it takes a while for it to work. So we put a lot of time, effort, and resources and millions of dollars really into understanding the problem, but to develop a ketogenic mitigation strategy in the form of ketone ester supplementation. And that we've published quite a few papers in scientific peer-reviewed journals on acutely administered therapeutic ketosis to prevent seizures, specifically for this problem of oxygen toxicity, which limits Navy SEAL diving, but it also limits, and this maybe comes into the conversation with cancer, it limits the efficacy and safety of hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which has 14 FDA approved applications. Of course, decompression sickness if you're a diver, but also carbon monoxide poisoning, diabetic wounds, radiation necrosis from cancer therapy. All these insurance will cover. So it's, FDA approved. So that evolution of understanding that the ketogenic diet could work and then getting funding probably took about 5 or 6 years. And that started around 2009 or 10. And that has then spun off into many different projects, including the use of therapeutic ketosis for different types of genetic disorders, seizure disorders, cancer, and then really working with different companies that have wearable technologies like continuous glucose monitors. For example, I work with Levels Health. They have a great program for this that would allow you to precisely understand your metabolic physiology and then adjust your diet, adjust your supplementation, and adjust other factors that could help you stay within therapeutic range for different disorders. That could be diabetes, that could be, metabolic optimization for performance enhancement. So I would, we have a dozen or more different projects related to therapeutic ketosis, but also metabolic interventions. So happy to discuss any number of them. Diet therapy, supplement therapy, training, anything is open.
Yeah, well, the thing about the ketogenic diet, I remember when we first talked for the very first time, years ago, it was kind of unknown what it was. A lot of people didn't know what it consists of, what it was beneficial for. It seemed like popularity really kind of increased because of the weight loss benefits of it. But I tend to believe that there's probably a lot of evidence that if you did some research on how our ancestors ate, that we probably did spend a lot of time in ketosis, that maybe our modern day way of living, where, and I've heard you talk about this in the past, where a lot of us grew up thinking we had to eat every 3 hours, like that's probably not natural, right? Like we probably didn't necessarily try to eat a ketogenic diet, but probably ate something similar to it in some cases, because when you kill the animal, you're going to eat the fat. You're not going to, nothing's going to go to waste. Where I grew up, where I was born in Portugal, where my parents grew up, like all food, was used, every piece of the pig, you ate the fat, but not because, any other reason besides the fact that it was calories, it was edible, it gave flavor to food, and it didn't go to waste. What do you say to that?
Yeah, all good points. Yeah, avoiding a dietary pattern or avoiding uh, uh, an extension of meal frequency to suppress ever going into ketosis is highly unnatural, I guess you could say. So yeah, you're right. Our ancestors were in and out of ketosis all the time, and that was natural. And I think suppressing that with frequent carbohydrate-based meals, especially sugar and starches, is a way to, it ultimately leads in the majority of people who are not sedentary and, we don't have the activity that we used to, ultimately leads to a caloric surplus. And then the foods that we're eating sort of fuel the fire and cause metabolic dysregulation, insulin resistance. And then we start, getting advancing age-related chronic diseases that are driven primarily by metabolic dysregulation. So in addition to, I've been a big advocate for, staying on top of diet and exercise, but also doing blood work and just measuring periodically, even once a year, but it should be maybe 3, maybe 4 times a year, looking at metabolic biomarkers that includes, fasting insulin levels, hemoglobin A1C, HSCRP, triglycerides. These things should be part of a panel that people should be measuring all the time. And to do it, the earlier you start doing it, the better. So you have sort of the historic reference. As we age, it becomes a little bit more difficult to maintain, our metabolic health as we age. So we got to stay on top of it. And it doesn't have to be a ketogenic diet, for optimal health. It's just some degree of carbohydrate restriction is and centralizing protein as the main macronutrient, and then titrating the level of carbohydrates to prevent metabolic dysregulation, right? So it's like that easy. However, I mean, what we study therapeutic ketosis for as for the medical management of disease processes. And that's a very powerful lever that is more powerful for the things that we study than any drug therapy.
And I don't want to gloss over it. For people listening who maybe have heard the term but don't know what it is a high fat, moderate protein, basically minimizing sugar and carbs as much as possible. In some cases, not having any to really get in ketosis and get the benefits of that. It's that type of diet. How
Mhm.
So a lot of people, when they hear about the diet, like, what is it? And they ask me questions and whatnot. A lot of times they look at me like I'm crazy. Like, wait, so the majority of what you eat is fat. That's the most your calorie intake. It's fat and protein, and then you always hear the common thing of like, okay, cholesterol, right? What about your cholesterol levels? And then also, much like yourself, I'm a gym rat. I do it for at our age, it's probably more for mental therapy
Mhm.
and health than it is for physical health. But it's something that's a huge part of my life, just exercising and whatnot. So athletes and people who are gym rats will say, "Hey, don't you need carbs? Aren't they required to?" Exercise and get the most out of your body and your workouts and whatnot and kind of sustain that. What would you say to those two concerns about do transitioning to a diet like this, should you be concerned about your cholesterol levels? And also, what's the impact on your workouts? Can you maintain muscle mass? Can you maintain your workouts? Can you maintain being active while consuming little to no carbs?
Mhm. For the first question, yeah, it is the macronutrients are kind of flipped, right? Instead of high carb standard American diet, it's high fat and with moderate protein and a level of carbohydrate restriction that stimulates fat burning, fat oxidation, so much that the accelerated metabolism of fat contributes to the production of ketones. So a ketogenic diet is the only diet that is um, sort of defined by an objective biomarker. That biomarker is blood beta hydroxybutyrate, urine acetoacetate, or breath acetone. And there's commercially available devices, FDA approved devices that can precisely or semi quantitatively measure these variables. And that helps people, do the clinical ketogenic diet. Over time, you're right. So there could be the biggest atherogenic biomarker that people see shifted in the wrong direction. Generally speaking, everything goes in the right direction. Hemoglobin A1C goes down, liver function, kidney function is usually unaltered. Inflammatory markers go down. Glycemic variability decreases, and that's a positive thing. And HDL typically goes up. That's a good thing. That's good for our good cholesterol. Triglycerides go down, but the elevation of LDL has created much of the noise and concern with doctors and people that want to adhere to a ketogenic diet. So there's work being done by Dave Feldman in collaboration with Dr. Nick Norwitz. He's PhD from Oxford, but also a fourth year medical student at Harvard. They've spearheaded a number of publications with Dr. David Ludwig on the lipid energy model, and that model predicts that lipoproteins function in the flux of fat metabolism in the context of a ketogenic diet. I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but but there in the context of a ketogenic diet, the phenotype or the situation where you have a person that has a dramatically elevated LDL cholesterol, and LDL is not cholesterol, but it's LDL is a lipoprotein that can carry cholesterol, but it also carries fat and is part of the general, fat oxidation flux in the body. A better biomarker to look at would be ApoB, which is in all the different, lipoproteins. That marker also goes up. So there's research being done now to suggest that the elevation of LDL and ApoB, because they usually go up together, is of little or no concern with the person that has an improvement in all the other biomarkers, meaning, and not just blood pressure goes down, energy levels go up, if inflammation goes down, triglycerides go down, glycemic control is variable. So you get these people, and it's quite often people that are more athletic with this lipoprotein going up. So I would say there's little or no concern there, but would it be ideal if all those things are improved and you take a pharmaceutical at a minimum effective dose to reduce LDL and ApoB down to normal levels? So this is a question that remains unanswered. And I have been tinkering with different drugs, not statins, but like Zetia, which is a ezetimibe, to specifically lower that because I hyperabsorb cholesterol. And that did not lead to any, side effects or anything, any performance impairment. But the lipid energy model would predict by the nature of the model that if you specifically lower this lipoprotein, that could perhaps impair the flux of fat metabolism that could ultimately, result in high fat oxidation. And so there's a lot of research that needs to be done. And I encourage people to measure their cardiometabolic biomarkers if they go on the diet, talk to their physician, and you also need to take into account your previous history, your health history. If you do have cardiovascular disease as high, if you have some existing predispositions, I think you should stay on top of your LDL and your ApoB. But if you're a healthy normal a healthy normal subject, male or female, and low carb or ketogenic diets has produced an enhancement of metabolic health biomarkers, excluding the elevation of LDL, I think there's less of a concern there. In the context of, I think this second question was what, athletics or working out. So yeah, it's no secret. I've been low carb and primarily ketogenic for 15 years now. And but I'm not an athlete. I kind of like a gym rat, but my total time lifting weights, I would say, is like 60, maybe 90 minutes if I have more liberal per week of lifting weights. But I do lift really heavy and I maintain, heavy sort of even like a powerlifting program. And that said, I do 1 to 2 hours of walking per day, some days 3 to 4. And I guess what I would call cardio, which is like hard work on the farm, just, moving a lot of things, just doing some heavy labor. But I have 2 dogs that sort of demand to be, so I have a non-negotiable morning walk and an evening walk. And typically after a meal, and wearing a continuous glucose monitor, what has been really enlightening is just seeing that if, if wearing a CGM and doing those walks after postprandial, it would look like I didn't even eat a meal. And because my blood glucose actually goes down, it would look like if you were to look and say, when did this person eat a meal? Because I'm eating low carb, because I'm eating ketogenic, it's like that would be almost impossible to identify on my metabolic parameter of blood glucose. So I think that's a really important observation that could apply to like 50% of the population, especially over 50 or 60 that are like diabetic, type 2 diabetes, or pre-diabetic. So just that simple, post-meal walk, carbohydrate restriction. These are like important insights that I've garnered myself that we sort of incorporate into our sort of research for metabolic optimization when we give and trying to understand what is the best long-term strategy for metabolic optimization. But in regards to like sugar pre-workout, I've actually been experimenting slightly with maple syrup. That we stayed at an Airbnb on a small farm, and the little cabin we stayed at was in a maple tree forest where the maple was being pulled from the trees and made right there. And it infused with elderberry, blueberry, and like ginger. And I brought some home, and I've been taking like maybe 10 to 20 grams in and around my workout, and noticed that, that gives a nice little kick, and I don't see it on my CGM. So I just dial back sort of the dose. But I take that, I use that with some electrolytes, either Element or Keto Start, which is the same electrolytes as Element, but it's bound to beta hydroxybutyrate. And I'll do that in and around my workout, maybe with a little bit of a creatine. And if people are concerned that low carb or keto is impairing performance, a tiny amount of carbohydrate in and around your workout can be, especially with electrolytes, can be extremely beneficial.
Yeah, I've always been a little skeptical of cholesterol because years ago I would go to translate for my father because he doesn't speak any English. He speaks
Mhm.
Portuguese, so I'd go translate for him, and his doctor would constantly tell him like he has to take his statins, he has to lower his cholesterol, and it was like so high that I thought it was his credit score. It was that high. It
Mhm.
was like just so, and he's like, out of all my patients, he has the highest cholesterol. So of course, on the drive
Mhm.
home, I'd always be screaming at him like, "Dad, come on, you got to change your lifestyle." You got, and then like another year would go by, and another year would go by, and then another year would go by, and I'm like, okay, now I'm starting to get skeptical how serious of an issue this really is because he has a glass of wine every night. He works his butt off. He lives like he's still a farmer in Portugal. He works construction outside with his hands all day, and then he comes home. He has goats, chickens,
Mhm.
farm, all this stuff in the backyard. So he's nonstop. So I would tell the doctor, I'm like, he has more energy than me. He's nonstop. I'm like, I don't like if this is harmful. I just don't see it, And
Yeah.
so then I ran into the work of she's a PhD from Australia, and I was looking for where is she? Well, this is somebody else that I want to talk about, but here's her Substack, Marion Damasi. I don't know if
Oh
you
yeah. Yeah, I know her.
yeah,
Yep. Mhm.
yeah, she's awesome, and
Yeah, she puts out great information. Mhm.
yeah, and she did some work on statins and got in trouble about it, because of it, and really just saying like maybe they're more harmful than good, and maybe it's like a lot of pharmaceutical drugs, maybe based on some very sketchy research, and really
Mhm.
was outspoken. She's done some amazing work, kind of exposing that whole field. I mean, it's one of the biggest money makers out there, and so. When I ran into her work and I'm like, this makes perfect sense. Like what
Mhm.
where is this threshold where is the research that shows that this is a threshold that you should be prescribing these what could be harmful drugs and for people to take them on a regular basis? My father recently had to have eye surgery, and they're looking at his paperwork, and they're like, "Hey, oh, you're on this." You're like, "Oh, are you taking your statins?" And he's like, sometimes." They're like, "Oh, you should be taking them every day." Just like they. And I'm just like, they don't even know what his cholesterol numbers are. They're just like kind of regurgitating this to
Oh
them.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
for somebody who doesn't think for themselves, or they're going to go home like, yeah, maybe I should take them, and not even look at the warnings or the possible side effects or whatnot. So yeah, that's something that I think we all have to be wary of, and that's why the ketogenic diet, when I really got exposed to it and really started learning about all the dietary health benefits of it, I'm like, this makes perfect sense. I was in my 20s. I had the worst joints, and I was just completely convinced it was from like squatting, playing basketball, playing sports, that all the wear and tear. Because typically that's what you hear, right? You have my knees hurt. Oh, no more cartilage, no more this, and I was just overdosing on glucosamine, cadroin, all this stuff, and it was helping a little bit, the
Mhm.
MSN for anti-inflammatory, and I would still, play a couple hours of basketball. I still have to take like ice baths or ice my knees just to get the inflammation down. And all of a sudden, I learned about the ketogenic diet, completely removed all sugar and carbs from my diet, and all my joint pain went away. Now I'm turning
Mhm.
40 and I have better joints now than I had in my 20s. And I realized that it was all dietary. It wasn't, some of it I'm sure is wear and tear. And it's still, I'm almost 40. Like if I play sports for a couple hours, I'm going to have some pain, but,
Mhm.
nothing like in my 20s. And that's where like this diet I think is so amazing, and not just this diet, but it really highlights the power of nutrition and diet. Like so many of our health issues could be resolved by changing the way we eat, the way we live, and whatnot. So what for people listening, what is the research? Because I think before we started recording, we talked about Jim Abrams, who's been on the show, and you exposed me to him. He does amazing work in regards to the Charlie Foundation and all the health benefits of the keto diet and whatnot, and fighting disease. And then also Dr. Thomas Seyfried, who was on soon after your first appearance on the show, and his work in Boston College with cancer, and his book Cancer as a Metabolic Disease, and all that stuff. Like, you've been researching the ketogenic diet forever, um, and you're obviously also been doing it forever. What health benefits have you seen in regards to just, anything else that you could see benefits in, and what research is there? Because I know even on Mark Bell's podcast, you talked about, I believe it was that show where you talked about even depression and some of the benefits in that. So for people listening, like, what are some of these health benefits or even disease fighting benefits that there's actually research to prove that the ketogenic diet can help with?
Yeah, the research on ketogenic diets has really exploded, I guess, since the last time I was on. And if people want to see the research that's being done, I encourage them to go to like PubMed and then type in ketogenic diet and see there are, I believe, I just did a just the PubMed search. The Google searches may have gone down, but that's influenced more by like mainstream media, when they pick up on things and they talk about it. But the basic science research and the clinical research has skyrocketed to clinicaltrials.gov, for example. If you go, Keto Nutrition is my informational website. So, and the blog is pretty good there. We have a lot of information on a range of different topics. But there are about something like 500 clinical trials on the ketogenic diet. These are registered clinicaltrials.gov, registered clinical trials on clinicaltrials.gov, and not all clinical trials are registered. So I'm just talking about registered, you know, typically university level, sometimes multi-site, IRB approved clinical trials. So that's 500. And then when I started this, there was like single digits on ketogenic, and there was like nothing on cancer, for example. But I think even in cancer, you have like dozens, if not 50 to 100, maybe clinical trials with a ketogenic diet. They're using that as an adjuvant in most cases to enhance the standard of care, but maybe there's a few using it as a standalone therapy to improve patient health. So I would say ketogenic diet therapy has been around, since 100 years, since over 100, 1920, but really has expanded for other neurological diseases. So that includes Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and as you mentioned, psychiatric diseases. So that includes Jan and Dave Bazuki have a foundation, the Bazuki Foundation, that is spearheading a lot of the research. I think there's at least 10 clinical trials. And that spans everything from bipolar disorder, which their son, Matt Bazuki, suffered bipolar and was put into remission for his bipolar by Dr. Chris Palmer, and then there's Dr. Shabani Sethi at Stanford. Christopher Palmer is at Harvard University, and then Sethi Shabani. But there's dozens of researchers now doing research on metabolic psychiatry for bipolar, schizophrenia, depression. Actually, the psychiatric disorder that kills more people is anorexia. And anorexia is a psychiatric disorder, and it can be pretty deadly. And there's a number of publications that came out on the use of a ketogenic diet for anorexia, in particular, ketogenic diet that's coupled with ketamine. So ketamine therapy coupled with the ketogenic diet has been remarkably effective and I cautiously say this is not a randomized controlled trial yet, but it's a case series and a number of patients. So the research is ongoing. But that's definitely one of the biggest emerging fields. And we know that pretty much every every neurological disorder is that's what we study is pathophysiologically somehow related to energy dysregulation, in particular in the brain. And that could be, for example, even things that like autoimmune disorders cause systemic inflammation that triggers neuroinflammation. And then that can alter brain energy metabolism, the neuropharmacology of your brain, meaning the neurotransmitters are regulated by the mitochondria. Mitochondria make, your dopamine, your catecholamines. So they have enzymes, monoamine oxidase, for example, is a mitochondrial enzyme. And when we have dysregulated metabolism in the brain, the mitochondria are the root of that metabolism. So we have altered neurotransmitters. So one way, and that's kind of how the ketogenic diet works. It's been a mystery. Some researchers will pinpoint one particular mechanism and say this is how the ketogenic diet works. I am of the belief that the ketogenic diet works by multiple mechanisms, more or less working in synergy. So things that we have studied, for example, are free radicals, reactive oxygen species, like they go down, and that drives inflammation. Inflammation goes down. Adenosine signaling. We're looking at epigenetic regulation. But also, like, to make it more tangible for people is that when you go on a ketogenic diet, or if you give ketone supplementation, that can elevate a neurotransmitter called GABA. And GABA is made from a neurotransmitter called glutamate. Glutamate, if you have too much glutamate, that can trigger seizures and give you anxiety and make you anxious. What the ketogenic diet does is stimulate the production of GABA through glutamate. So glutamate is used to make GABA. So there's an enzyme, glutamic acid decarboxylase, and we've shown that that's increased in activity. So you're converting more of a neurotransmitter that causes hyperexcitability to one that has a brain stabilizing, uh, uh, effect at preserving, the stability of the brain, and that's through GABA. So that's like one mechanism that I'm very interested in, because a lot of the anti-seizure drugs are sort of work through this GABAergic mechanism, and that's pretty clear that it's working in that way. So the implications of that are that anxiety, is now a big problem too. And you could, especially in like the student population, which I kind of deal with, many of them have like panic. Academia is hard enough, and everybody's angling to get the best scores in med school, and a lot of people just feel overworked. But following a well-formulated ketogenic diet can give your brain a steady fuel supply. It normalizes glucose and then elevates ketones, which is an alternative fuel for the brain. But it also changes the brain neurotransmitter systems in a way that can suppress anxiety and actually give you a more calming effect. And I think that has been, well, helpful for me for just, everything associated in academia, which is stressful. So that has been beneficial. So I think there's broad implications outside of the diets used for pathologies, right? I think there's many take homes that people can get, many takeaways that people can get from the conversation that is just, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a ketogenic diet. There are people that are unwilling or unable to follow a restrictive ketogenic diet. And that's sort of the foundation of our work, is actually developing ketone esters, and then later working with Patrick Arnold, who is a chemist in the performance enhancement world. I developed the idea of a ketone salts, which is, ketones are beta hydroxybutyrate, for example. In 2011 or 12, the only ketone salt that existed was sodium beta hydroxybutyrate. So it's like, oh, why don't I balance the sodium with potassium? And then I looked, and like no one had actually even thought about this molecule. It was not in the CAS database, for example. So we came up with the idea of making potassium beta hydroxybutyrate. Well, then what about calcium? What about magnesium? What about other divalent? So I came up with the idea of like a sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium beta hydroxybutyrate. So kind of a quad salt of that. And it was an idea I was bouncing back and forth with Patrick Arnold, who has a long history, and you could watch his Tim Ferriss podcast on performance enhancement history that he has. But he took another angle to help me sort of we conceived the idea, synthesized it, and tested it, and we came up with the idea of, the ketone salts, which then got picked up and by another company and sold as Go BHB. So it was sort of our original idea. And Go BHB is, I think, a $500+ million per year industry right now. So it was sort of an idea that was more or less kind of taken from us. And basically, if you get a ketone supplement on the market, that's typically has like Go BHB in it. So a lot of what we've published and tested are the ketone esters. They're quite expensive. They taste pretty bad, and I have access to them, but I don't use them. What I do use though is different ketone salts, specifically keto starch, which has the same electrolytes as like Element, but the elements, or actually the minerals, are bound to beta hydroxybutyrate. So it's like taking electrolytes, but then the electrolytes dissociate from beta hydroxybutyrate, and then you have energy and electrolytes. So that's usually my pre-workout. I take like a half a packet in the morning with creatine, and then I'll do the other half later in the afternoon if I work out. So these ketone supplements have the ability to further augment the therapeutic efficacy of the ketogenic diet. So I think of them as sort of like, and that's already being done with medium chain triglycerides like MCT oil. There's clinically being used the MCT oil ketogenic diet, where a major component of the fat of the diet is these medium chain triglycerides. They are a saturated fat. But that'll get your ketones up to like a certain level, and then you could add ketone supplementation. And what that does, interestingly, is further lowers the blood glucose and then further elevates the ketones. And a biomarker that Dr. Thomas Seyfried developed was the glucose ketone index. And we know that if you achieve a glucose ketone index, which is the glucose level over the ketone level in millimolar concentration, and so if you achieve a glucose ketone index of 1, simply stated, the level of glucose in the blood and the level of ketones are equimillimolar, meaning that your brain is essentially being fueled 50% glucose and 50% ketones. So if you achieve a glucose ketone index of 1, that is incredibly neuroprotective, and it also has the incredible ability to metabolically manage seizures, to my understanding, better than any anti-seizure drug that we know of. And that's not my statement. That's kind of like, the epileptologists, who understand these therapies would kind of concur with that. So what Thomas Seyfried has done is sort of advance this idea of a glucose ketone index, and I believe anywhere between 1 and 4 is highly efficacious for the metabolic management of certain cancers. Maybe not all cancers, but I think the large majority of cancers would be highly responsive to a patient transitioning their physiology to a glucose ketone index of 1 to 4. And then that could, in and of itself, reduce cancer growth, maybe reverse it, but would also make the cancer far more vulnerable to other modalities that target, chemo, radiation, for example, and immune-based therapies. Ketogenic therapies enhance the adaptive immune system. So, for example, checkpoint inhibitors would have a greater effect. Essentially, your body's ability to respond to these drugs, and for your immune system to be coaxed in identifying and neutralizing cancer in that way. So I talked about a lot of different applications here, but I'm glad to go off, on either one of them, or even a different tangent if you want to.
Well, the cancer thing's interesting because, when you mention it and you talk about on your TED Talk that good, I highly recommend people checking it out. It's glucose is an energy source of cancer cells, right? And so it's like, even if you know nothing about science or nutrition or keto or cancer, it sounds like, logically speaking, there would be some benefits in starving the cancer cells of glucose. And I had a friend of mine that got cancer. He was in his late 20s at the time, early 30s, and they said he had cancer. And I sent him your TED Talk. I sent him my podcast I did with Dr. Thomas Seyfried and a bunch of other stuff. And he brings it up to his doctor, and his doctor's like, "Oh, I wouldn't worry about that, but I would stay away from red meat." And that's what he told him. And I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, I did ask him, like, can you have him send me, or can you get whatever he's talking about in regards to red meat that he thinks could be harmful if you have cancer. But it seems like we get stuck in, like, once we subscribe to a way of treating something, or we subscribe to what is good or what is bad. It's almost like just trying to convince my mother now, who's been brainwashed to believing that, I can't believe it's not butter is better for you than real butter. It's like hard. It's like that saying, it's easier to trick somebody than convince them they've been tricked. Like, now I'm trying to convince her that she's been tricked, and it's hard to snap her out of it. I feel like sometimes in the medical field we have similar issues where it's like, once we we have decided as a community that, like, hey, too much salt is bad. The food pyramid is this, and all these things. It's hard to get people to kind of go against that. Do you find that to be an issue, that it's hard to push new ideas in the world of health and nutrition and medicine?
New ideas. So some of the ideas that we research and try to advance are in a very nascent stage of development, meaning that, we have preclinical models that show this, and then there are some case reports and maybe some case series studies. For example, like, with cancer. So but even, let's take it a little bit of a step back. So even the therapeutic use of a ketogenic diet for epilepsy was highly speculative and highly questioned. So the question is, maybe 50 years ago, it's like, okay, where are the randomized controlled trials? But I think we have like 5 or 6 randomized RCTs for ketogenic diet trials now. So that data is there, at least for epilepsy. So we're in the same position now with other disorders, like with metabolic psychiatry. Research is being done right now. These take quite some time to complete, and with cancer, some of them have been done, but they're ongoing. There are the issue is, it's, you kind of have to monetize something to get the financial incentive behind it to advance the clinical application of it in evidence-based medicine. So, I teach medical students, and luckily our school does, more recently, they do prioritize nutrition as something that the students should learn. So we have a mandatory nutrition scholarly concentration research course that they have to take. That I'm a pretty active faculty leader in that course, mentor quite a few students. So it's generally accepted that diet can be the most important tool for the management of the patients, for 70% or more of the patients that these future doctors will see. So if medicine wants to promote prevention, and wants to promote, to get away from sick care, and then promote people from not getting these disorders in the first place, they really need to prioritize basic nutritional, guidelines. The guidelines also need some adjustment. But in the context of ketogenic diets, I mean, we are at a nascent stage, and I do recommend people, for example, I guess the low hanging fruit, the big ones would be obesity and type 2 diabetes. Like, if we can just target that, then that makes many people susceptible to cancers. So there's like a dozen or more different cancers that are intimately associated with our metabolic health, specifically obesity, type 2 diabetes. Like, since 1980, liver cancer is 3 times higher since 1980, the prevalence of liver cancer. So it's driven by fatty liver. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is kind of ubiquitous. So if you do have, and I'm just focusing like on liver cancer, but you have gallbladder, you have endometrial, you have pancreatic cancer, you have breast cancer, even. All these cancers are tightly linked with our metabolic health, specifically obesity, type 2 diabetes. But I'm just going to focus on liver cancer because from our research and other research, The liver is a very fertile ground for cancer cells to grow. So if you have if you have colon cancer, if you have lung cancer, and then that primary tumor, those tumor cells get into circulation and they end up in the liver, for example. The liver is chock full of sugar in the form of glycogen and also fat in most people. And it becomes a super fertile ground for a cancer cell to start growing and proliferating because they have unbridled access to to fuel for growth and proliferation, right? So in some of our studies that we do with a metastatic model of cancer, we inject a little bit of cancer cells underneath the flank, and then the liver is just peppered with metastasis of little microtumors and then that grows, that gets into circulation. So the whole point is that uh, we are our metabolic health, our dietary patterns are creating obesity, type 2 diabetes in the large majority of people, and this is creating a very fertile ground for precancerous cells to transition into cancer cells, and then a fertile ground for the further growth and development of those cancer cells. So a ketogenic diet, on the other hand, or carbohydrate restriction, we make ketones by depleting liver sugar and liver glycogen. And what also happens when you go implement carbohydrate restriction is that it reverses fatty liver. So the liver is kind of like becomes, instead of a fertile ground for growth of cancer, it becomes a desert. It's like, cancer cells from a primate will end up there. And if you, when you put even mice and rats on a ketogenic diet versus a high carb sugar diet, and you take out the liver, it's like half the size. And it just looks, it's bright red. It's the way it should. Whereas you look at a liver from, a standard rodent chow high carb diet, and it's quite not, it's quite fatty, right? It's like a great petri dish for growing cancer cells. So I give this, analogy because I think with cancer, with especially liver cancer growing, it's an analogy for all other cancers too. Surprisingly, though, like brain cancer is not linked to obesity and type 2 diabetes. And that brings up the question, and many people who do get brain cancer, many of them have generally good metabolic health. Maybe they were exposed to some kind of toxin. And I do believe that cancer is not a purely metabolic disease. It's a very dynamic interplay between metabolism, genetics, and epigenetics. The influence of various environmental factors can influence gene expression in ways that, if we're genetically susceptible, the expression of those oncogenes sort of happen by repeated insults, for example. Or, yeah, I mean, and you have the case of like pediatric cancers, right? I mean, in kids that are otherwise, have good metabolic health. So this comes up quite often, and there could be other things that's impacting mitochondrial function and triggering, we know, um, I think it's really important to acknowledge that and there was a big review of this in a cancer journal that has an impact factor of over 500. It's like the 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 hallmark. It's like the flagship journal for the American Cancer Foundation. And what they did is look at modifiable risk factors for cancer. And of the top 12, I mean, 9 of 12 were directly related to metabolism. The ones that weren't were like smoking, human papillomavirus, and some other viruses. But one could also argue that, like, if you did smoke and you had certain viruses that cause cancer, and viruses can cause cancer. I think Michael Bishop got the Nobel Prize for that work. These viruses target the mitochondria. Smoking targets the mitochondria. Mitochondrial dysregulation can ultimately result in impaired energy metabolism and, crippling mitochondrial function with various toxins or even viruses lowers ATP. It's sensed at the level of the nucleus as an energetic crisis, and that is a trigger for oncogenic transformation, meaning the transition of a normal cell to a cancer cell when it senses an energetic crisis. So it essentially de-differentiates to a stem cell-like cell. And then with further provocative agents or genetic transformation can become a cancer cell. So this sort of, in summary, that's like the metabolic theory of cancer that Thomas Seyfried has written about exhaustively in his book, Cancer as a Metabolic Disease. There's a lot of important information to take away from that. And I think the big message is that the message that I try to convey from our basic science research and clinical is that if you focus on, first and foremost, your body composition and that's maybe at the top of the chain, body composition and performance and just your VO2 max, these are like the big things that are going to impact how long we live. And then to measure objective biomarkers, a whole suite of cardiometabolic biomarkers I talked about, CBC, comprehensive metabolic panel, but also fasting insulin, HSCRP, hemoglobin A1C. You get all that in line and you live, through your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, you're going to be far less likely if you prioritize those health biomarkers, body composition, VO2 max, get an annual DEXA scan to make sure you're not wasting away muscle tissue and do that. Like you should prioritize, I'll get a DEXA scan every July, and then I make a goal to basically not lose more than a pound or two of muscle the next year. And as I age, that gets harder to do. So as I get older, I have to put more time, effort, and strategy into building and preserving lean body mass, which is our metabolic engine and keeps everything healthy. So these are the things that are going to prevent the top three things that kill us, right? Cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative diseases, and cancer. So I think that's sort of like a big message that I've been trying to instill even in our medical students. And a lot of physicians just don't think about that in that context of restore and preserve metabolic health in their patients, and then they won't be a patient.
Well, that's something I constantly say on the show is like there's always these conversations about how do we make healthcare more affordable? How do we lower prices, the prices of medicine, the prices of this and that? And I'm always like, we need to like just redirect that energy into why do we need so much healthcare? Like instead of, because I feel like we're constantly dealing with the symptoms and not getting the root cause of the issue. So it's like that's how we look at health in America. It seems like if you have joint pain, instead of going on ketogenic diet and taking all the food that causes inflammation, they give you a painkiller, right? And I think it was Dr. Chris Kresher who said it's like having foot pain because you have a rock in your shoe, and instead of telling you to get the rock out of your shoe, they just give you a pill for the pain. And that's kind of the way we look at things.
Analogy,
healthcare, yeah, and we look at healthcare kind of the same way, where it's like instead of getting to the root cause of the issue, it's like, okay, why are so many people on prescription drugs? Why are so many prescription drugs needed? We're just trying to figure out how do we make them more affordable, And so you're absolutely right, and I think a huge percentage of our health issues is dietary or environmental, or because there's our biggest organ is our skin. We're putting stuff on our skin. We're not getting enough sunlight. I think vitamin D and what's his name, Dr. Cruz, some of the work he's done and kind of highlighted
Jack Cruz, yeah.
Jack Cruz, yeah, another guy.
Wicked smart, a little bit of a maverick, but yeah, he's got some. I actually implement a lot of what he says. There's a few things like on the diet stuff, he's a little bit off, but I recommend people look him up and follow some of his advice. Pretty good, especially with sun and vitamin D.
Yeah, I am convinced that the sun is because I've been around my whole life construction workers, farmers, people who spend all day outside, and they're some of the healthiest people ever. And I just think like logically, again, like most things, if it seems to make sense, it's probably because it does. Like I feel better when I'm outside and when I'm sweating. You work outside, I work outside. I love playing sports outside. You get that detox, and I believe sweating is one of the strongest ways of detoxing. And you just get any, maybe even metals, anything out of your system. You do some type of detoxing when you get that crazy sweat where you're just drenched, and then you take a shower, you feel great. You feel like you did just do a cleanse, So it's I think, these are the things we should be focusing on instead of constantly being like, oh, thank God we have insulin for diabetics, and how do we make insulin cheaper, and that type of
Mhm.
thing. Because now what happens is people can kind of they can kind of say like, hey, now I don't have to change my lifestyle. Now I don't, because I can just take this insulin. I can just do this. I can just take this
Yeah.
painkiller for the pain, and not worry about not worry about how do I prevent even having this pain. So
Yeah.
but I also wanted you and I know we're running out of time, and I'm going to try to get as much in as I can before we
Mhm.
run out of time. But something I say also on the show, and this is kind of more of a theory than any real evidence-based idea, but I always say like kids do what you do, they don't do what you say, they do what you do, right? You see a
Mhm.
lot of times you see fit parents, you see fit kids, you see fat parents, you see fat kids. They learn to eat and live the way their parents do. So a lot of times, like we talk about, like in like my wife's family, for example, I would have these discussions with her because they have a history of certain things in their family, like health issues. And I'm like, okay, so in her head, she feels like she's doomed to get these things, right? To have some of these issues. And I tell her that I have this theory that I think that some of the health issues isn't genetic and unavoidable, but some of it's because you're literally living the same lifestyle, and maybe lack of nutrition, maybe lack of movement, exercise, whatever it may be, consumption of foods with preservatives, whatever it may be that your parents did. So maybe you're receiving some of those health issues not based like genetically where it's unavoidable, but maybe based on lifestyle. Do you think there's any truth to that?
Oh, 100%. So dietary patterns and then behavioral patterns. And then I guess the amalgamation of those two, it would be ultra processed food, I think fits into that because that fits into dietary patterns, also behavioral patterns. And ultra processed food is probably, Dr. Robert Lustig. And I am a consultant for a company called RX Sugar, and they're advancing the use of allulose as a replacement for sugar. Like, their motto is like, let's solve for sugar, RX Sugar. And allulose is it's unlike sucralose. I think you wanted me to comment on that. Or so allulose is a natural sugar, and it could largely replace, sucrose. And we're actually doing it's a fructose epimer, and there are certain cancer cells that grow like crazy in the presence of fructose. But if you give allulose, then it stops their growth, and it basically blocks the GLUT5 transporter. So that's another discussion. But I think we do have solutions for, and I'm not against sucralose or aspartame or all these things, but
Well, it's
I
stevia.
don't think stevia is okay. Yeah, I think stevia and monk fruit are great. Yeah. But allulose is a bit different because it is, well, like stevia, it's natural, like monk fruit, it's natural. But allulose stimulates GLP-1. Allulose is sweet, and it has some interesting functional properties. But if you combine it, for example, with stevia or monk fruit, so allulose is pretty remarkable. So with ultra processed food, you have two problems. You have just excess sugar that is a huge problem, and it triggers obesity in kids and in families that buy this. I was just at the supermarket. The mom was there with all the kids, and it was just full of ultra processed food that is just sugar sweetened beverages, sugar laden food. And then you have in the US, at least, you have all the chemicals. You have 9,000 chemicals, some of them known obesogens that are part of ultra processed food. And my next call coming up, which is why I got to jump off, is with Todd Wagner, Mark Cuban's business partner. Is Todd Wagner, and he lives here in Florida, and he has his company, his foundation is called Food Fight USA, and he is advocating for amending the GRAS regulations to prevent many of these chemicals from just infusing our ultra processed food market. And many of these things are well-known carcinogens. So I see, and he'd be a good person to interview on the podcast. So I see ultra processed food as being part of that dietary pattern that families have. And it's a learned behavior to just like, it's convenience food, it tastes good. And and really focusing on just, if we just focus on eliminating ultra processed, not that everybody has to eat organic, everybody has to eat ketogenic. No, simple carbohydrate restriction, moderating carbohydrates, restricting it if you have an existing problem, and just eliminating ultra processed food and sugar sweetened beverages. And if you go from Coke to a Diet Coke, hey, that's a lesser of two evils. But if you can transition away from even, the artificial sweeteners to the element drink that you're drinking there, or just something that's not, uh, in the ultra processed world or tainted with other things, that's going to be, and the hyper palatability of some of the things that are ultra, sweetened with sucralose, especially because that's hyper palatable, tends to trigger the brain in a way to make us want more sweet things. And I do think that's a problem.
Yeah, yeah, without a doubt. I love Dr. Robert Lustig. He's actually been on.
Oh
Uh,
yeah. Yep.
he did a whole show about the sugar industry and how, we have all these health issues and how money ends up influencing a lot of these issues. And then at the very end of the show, we got into a little debate about the COVID vaccine. This was like right when they introduced it, and I'm just like, oh,
Hmm.
this is such a bad way to end the show. But we ended up having a little disagreement on that. But
Yeah.
besides that, I can't recommend his work enough. I think he was also in the documentary Sugar Coated, which is a really good one
Yep.
about the history of that. And Dr. Gary Taubes has done great work on the
Hmm.
history of that. Also,
Yep.
but real quick before you go, I am curious on how somebody who doesn't spend a whole lot of time lifting heavy weights, but does lift heavy, because if you follow him on Instagram, he's Dr. Dominic D'Agostino is very strong. How do you keep your size? And is it a certain amount of calories you're intaking? Is it how often you're eating? I've been eating I've been fasting and eating once a day for years now, and just doing a ketovore diet. But I do
Yeah.
take creatine. I take pre-workouts. I'm also curious if any of that stuff will kick me out of fasting or ketosis if I'm kind of messing up the benefits of those things by going to the gym in the morning and taking a pre-workout. But what do you take?
Well, I think, in regards to strength and keeping muscle and building size and maintaining that size, it's way, way easier to maintain the size. When I was 19, I was deadlifting 600 for reps and, benching 405. So I was pretty strong but I was following more of a high carb diet. But over the years, I've learned how to, adjust my diet for health and longevity. Uh, but if size and strength is 80 to 90% your diet, right? And what you do outside the gym. And for me, my training is very precise, I guess you would say. Like, I am going to train today and I know exactly what I'm going to do. And I know my sets, I know my warm up sets, and I know my work sets. And the whole thing can be done in like 20 minutes. But keeping a training journal is probably the most thing. So it's like, and it builds off, and keeping a periodized program, meaning having some system of progression and then maintenance, and then maybe taking a step back and then another phase of progression, maintenance. This is called nonlinear periodization. Ed Cohen did sort of maybe developed this, but it was like a powerlifting staple. So knowing exactly what you're going to do, some people just get into the gym and do whatever. But if you have a very specific goals, and for me, that involves writing it down. So any meaningful goal that I ever achieved, I had it written down. I referred to it manically, obsessively until I achieved that goal. And I created dozens of little small goals until I achieved that goal. So I think that's the most important thing. And to also acknowledge that nutrition is going to basically give your body the energy and the resources for building the muscle to build and maintain that strength.
Creatine,
Oh,
testosterone, any natural testosterone boosters, any obviously that's always a concern as we get older.
yeah. Well, I eat a lot of red meat. We live on a farm. One of our cows got struck by lightning, so that's in my freezer now. So I'm eating a lot of red meat, which has a lot of creatine. I do take creatine monohydrate. But in regards to testosterone boosters, I do take DHEA supplement, 100 milligrams, and then that boosts testosterone a little bit. I am an advocate for hormone replacement therapy if you need it, but also understand that even someone my age, pushing 50, you can maintain normal testosterone with diet, lifestyle. And if you don't want to jump on TRT, you could do what I do, take a small pulse of DHEA in the morning. And my blood work is indicating that I have normal LH and FSH, so it's not causing any kind of suppression. So that's like my test booster, but I haven't really, I've done Tonga Ali and maybe a couple other things, but really didn't see anything in my blood work to indicate that they were, my FSH was higher when I took one of the Tonga Alis. So that jumped up, but everything else, it didn't seem to influence it that much.
Oh, what was the Turkistrone? Those plant
I've,
steroids?
I've never tried any of that stuff. Yeah, I'm really old school. It's just like, meat,
Yeah, yeah.
carnivore, keto diet and just stick to the basics,
And lifting heavy can raise your testosterone, obviously, right?
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. Yep. Big
Awesome. Well,
factor.
I know you got an important conversation
Mhm.
coming up. Yeah, if him or anybody else that you find that you think would be an interesting chat for the show, I'm always more than happy to take some recommendations. I've had many of your
Awesome.
recommendations on in the past. So,
Yeah. Dr. Nick Norwitz is good. Yeah, Dr. Nick Norwitz is pretty good. Dave Feldman would be great if you haven't had him on already.
Nick Norwitz, he's the one who's not a big fan of what's his name? Oh, dude, the YouTuber, Norton.
Lane's a good so Lane Norton and Nick Norwitz fight, but I love both of those guys, and I would actually like to do a conversation between the two. Yeah, they're both wicked smart and they have a lot of good information, but they disagree on some things, I guess.
Well, it's
So,
because he's a little anti-keto Norton, but
yeah,
his pre-workout's actually phenomenal. I do take his pre-workout, even though he needs to get
yeah,
the sucralose out of it. It's actually a great formula. But thank
yeah,
you, Dom. I don't want to make you late for your
yeah.
next conversation. Stay in touch, and thanks again for the time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Ricky. Appreciate it. Take care.
Take care.
Bye bye.